All right, let's talk about one of the most confusing and frankly high-risk areas in shop safety. OSHA's rules for mechanical power press inspections. We're going to crack the code on this thing. The goal here is to build a compliance program that's not just some checklist you have to tick off, but a real, genuine, audit-proof safety net. So let's get right into it.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to unpack this compliance puzzle that OSHA has created. Then we'll look at the two kinds of rules it gives you, one that's crystal clear and one that's, well, not. The real key is cracking the code using a landmark legal case. Once you've got that, we'll build a super practical 4-tier inspection plan, show you how to make it audit-proof, and then wrap up with the biggest takeaways.
You know, the heart of the problem is right here in the regulation itself, 29 CFR 1910.217. This standard, it kind of has a split personality. On one side, it gives you these very specific, crystal clear orders. But on the other side, it leaves some really critical details dangerously vague. And that's what creates this compliance trap for so many employers, even ones with the best intentions.
And that really brings us to the question you have to ask yourself. Right now, as it stands, is your press inspection program a safety net that's actually protecting your people, or is it an accidental compliance trap just waiting for an inspector to walk in the door and spring it? The stakes here are just incredibly high.
So, about that split personality, here's what it looks like. On one side, you've got what we call the directed component. This is a short list of super specific, non-negotiable weekly tasks. But then you have the general component, which covers basically everything else on the press. And for that, it just uses this fuzzy mandate of periodic and regular inspections. And that one simple phrase, that's where all the confusion really starts.
Okay, so let's really break these two things down. We need to get a handle on what OSHA tells you to do, point blank, and more importantly, what it leaves dangerously unsaid.
Okay, first up, the clear part. OSHA is explicit here. It mandates a weekly inspect and test on 3 absolutely critical safety systems. We're talking about the clutch and brake, the heart of the machine that stops that slide. Then there's the anti-repeat feature, which is crucial for preventing a second unintended stroke. And finally, the single stroke mechanism. And look at the language here. Inspect and test. A quick visual check is not going to cut it. You have to actually test them to make sure they work. And the rule is absolute. If you find a single problem, that press comes out of service immediately, no exceptions.
And now for the vague part. For every other part on that press, the frame, the controls, the loop systems, you name it, OSHA just says they need periodic and regular inspections. So what does that actually mean? Daily? Monthly? Annually? The standard gives you nothing. It's deliberately ambiguous, and that ambiguity is the source of the biggest legal risk for employers. It's the core of the puzzle we've got to solve.
So, if the regulation itself doesn't define periodic and regular, how in the world are you supposed to comply? Well, here's the secret. The answer isn't actually in the regulation. It's found in legal precedent and established industry standards, which have basically become the missing instruction manual for this rule.
And this brings us to a really pivotal moment, a landmark court case called Secretary of Labor versus Siemens Energy and Automation. This one single case completely changed how OSHA interprets and enforces this entire standard.
The result of that Siemens case was an absolute game changer. See, OSHA argued that the company was at fault because they didn't follow the press manufacturer's own maintenance manual. And the court agreed. That set a crazy powerful precedent. What it means for you is that your press manufacturer's manual, it's not just a bunch of suggestions anymore. It's now treated as a de facto part of the regulation itself.
So, the Siemens case basically gave us these unwritten rules. First, your inspections have to be thorough. We're talking even if it means you have to take things apart to check hidden stuff like brake linings. Second, like we just said, the manufacturer's maintenance schedule is not optional. And third, industry standards, specifically ANSI B11.1, are used to fill in the rest of the gaps. That's where the guidance for things like pre-shift operator checks comes from.
Okay, so we've cracked the code. We've got all the pieces of the puzzle, from OSHA, the Siemens case, and the ANSI standards. So now, let's put it all together into a practical, 4-tier inspection plan that you can actually use on your shop floor.
This 4-tier schedule is basically your legally defensible plan. It kicks off with pre-shift checks done by the operator. That's coming from the ANSI standards. Then you've got that mandated weekly inspect and test done by a competent person. Following that, you have a more in-depth monthly check by maintenance, looking at things like lubrication systems. And finally, you wrap it up with a really thorough annual inspection, which often involves teardowns and is driven by your manufacturer's manual. That completes the whole cycle.
So, having a great plan is one thing, right? But proving you actually follow it is something else entirely. An inspection plan is pretty much useless in an audit if you don't have the paperwork to back it up and the right safety procedures to support it.
And when it comes to your documentation, your records, OSHA is very, very specific. Your records absolutely must contain these 3 key pieces of information.
Every single certification record has to have these 3 things: the date the work was done, the signature of the person who did it, and the unique identifier of the press, like its serial number. That's it. This is the primary evidence an OSHA auditor is going to demand to see. If you don't have it, as far as they're concerned, the work never happened.
But these records are so much more than just legal defense. If you actually analyze them over time, you can start to see trends. You might notice that one press needs its brake adjusted way more often, or a certain component keeps failing. This data turns your compliance paperwork into a really powerful tool for predictive maintenance, helping you prevent failures before they even happen. And, of course, finding a problem during an inspection is only half the battle. You have to be able to fix it safely, and this is completely non-negotiable. All maintenance and repair work requires a strict lockout/tagout program, or LOTO, to control hazardous energy.
Now on a mechanical press, you're dealing with multiple types of energy. You've got to lock out the main electrical power, of course. You have to de-energize and bleed out all the pneumatic and hydraulic pressure. And critically, and this is the one people often forget, you have to control the mechanical energy. The massive weight of that slide can fall because of gravity, even when the power's off. That is why you must block it with properly rated safety blocks before anyone ever reaches into the die area.
All right, we have covered a ton of ground here. So let's bring it all together and recap the strategic actions that really make up your compliance blueprint.
Here's your action plan. First, audit your current program against that 4-tier model we talked about. Next, treat your manufacturer's manuals like they're the law, because OSHA does. Formalize your pre-shift checks with a documented checklist that operators sign. Make sure you verify and document the competency of your team. And finally, integrate machine-specific lockout/tagout procedures into every single maintenance job. And that really just leaves us with one last thought. Is your inspection program just a static checklist, something you do to avoid a fine? Or is it a living, breathing, dynamic safety management system that is actively protecting your people and improving your operations every single day? The answer to that question? Well, that's the difference between just having compliance and having a true culture of safety.